Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by, and welcome back to the 2020 Project Orchids series, where we look at 4 sets of plants effectively, starting at the beginning of the year in March. There's a set of videos there, 4 parts, and then there's another 4 parts coming now in June. In 3 months' time we'll revisit the same plants again. This is part 2, which is the Dendrobiums, and it's the same set of plants as last time in the same sequence, and we'll be looking at a picture of what they look like in March, and then I'll film them as they are now and have a chat about the progress that's been made, if any. In one case I think we've gone backwards, but yeah, so that's the format anyway. This is part 2. The part 2 before this, when we looked at the plants in March, the link's in the description. So if you choose to, you can stop watching this one now and go and watch that one to refresh your memory what they look like in March. And then perhaps come back to this one after. But if not, if you've got a good memory, plus we'll be looking at the pictures, the stills of what they look like in March in this one anyway. So let's get going with the Dendrobiums. And behind door number 1 we have Dendrobium rhodostictum, one of my Latourias. One of my Latourias that still actually got a leaf or two after the heat wave last year. Whacked them. Just whacked them down. This one we chose because it still had some signs of life, and during this growing season I was hoping it was going to come back. As it was at the beginning of the year, it survived the winter, which was good. They don't like the cold, but at this point in time it was doing nothing. Literally, it was just sitting there. I was hoping that the longer days and the warmer temperatures, especially day and night really, was actually going to bring this back into growth. Otherwise it's just going to go backwards or downhill. If you know, it needs new growths with new leaves and some new roots to get itself going. So let's see what happened anyway. Okay, so I wasn't expecting miracles from this. Staying alive would have been good, but with the longer day lengths and the warmer temperatures, this plant should be coming back into growth, and it did. And then failed miserably, because that little bit there was a new growth and it pushed up directly into the bark, so it failed. So now it's sitting there doing nothing, and effectively it's exactly as it was last time we looked at it 3 months ago. This plant may well fail, yeah? I mean, there's not a lot else I can do with it, but it needs to grow a new growth during this season. Otherwise there's not a lot of point in keeping it really. You know, I mean, we've got 2 leafless pseudobulbs, canes, sorry, one with a very manky leaf on, and the last one that actually bloomed with a set of 3 leaves on, which is about more like what it should be. But this needs to grow. This needs to get some new growth coming out from the base, and at the moment it's not doing it. So well, we shall see. It will either progress, or it will stay as it is, or it will go backwards. Unpredictable at the moment, but it's got no strength in it. You know, it's the heat wave last year just knocked all my Latourias back. This one didn't go as far back and as bad as some of the others, but nonetheless it's lost its oomph. It just won't grow. So we will have to see what happens with this one, and it may well be nothing in 3 months' time. We shall see. And next out of the traps is Dendrobium lindleyi, and I'm sorry about the lousy picture of the blooms. This was one of the photos I lost with the crash with the laptop. Literally anything between when I started using the laptop and when it crashed was lost, but I've done a screen grab, so you've got a picture. Now this was bought last year, got it through the winter. It had a rest. I didn't give it a total rest, it did get dribbles of water, but nonetheless I wasn't expecting anything out of this. I was expecting it to grow this year, rest this coming winter and bloom next year. But we did get blooms, so I was over the moon. Couldn't have expected any more from a small plant like that. Now this one's a shame, because looking at the plant as it is now, to all intents and purposes, it looks exactly the same as it did when we looked at it 3 months ago. There is a subtle difference. On all of these canes is a little stumpy bit. We had quite a mass blooming on this in the gap. On a plant I had no expectations for it to bloom. Again, what we're waiting for this to do now is come back into growth. It's done its blooms, and I was reliably told with lindleyi that there is quite a delay after the bloom's finished and the new growths actually start. But when they start, they really kick off. So I'm at that wait point at the moment now. The plant's healthy, it bloomed well for the size of the plant, and you know, we now need some new growths to get going. So it's just in that sort of wait point at the moment. It's got some reasonable roots, but again, with the new growths will come some new roots. So just waiting. I mean, they could appear from anywhere, quite honestly, but they're most likely to come out on this right hand side. That's the I can see a new growth. One. There. So it is starting, so it's just coming back into growth with its first one. That's quite a bit set back a bit, which is good, because I was expecting them all to come out off the end. So we have one. There will be more will follow on. So just keep our eye on that one. Hopefully by the time we look at that in 3 months' time, we'll have some, some good progress on new growths. I won't say many, but a good few, I would hope. At least 3 or 4, and they should be pushing on, getting to a reasonable size by then. So we'll watch the progress, but the progress is just beginning, having had a really good blooming that was unexpected. So I'm pleased with this one. It's done well. Yeah, good result for the bucks. Next up is one of my larger nobile types, a potted one. And some are on mounts, most are in pots actually, the nobiles. This was bought in the middle of last year at Burnham's in full bloom. It's out of season, and I'm not quite sure what the hell it's going to do, but at this point in the year, the new growths that matured through the winter, that should have matured the previous year, so they matured during the winter, have matured at this point. I was just waiting to see what happened next at this time. Were those canes going to bloom? The old canes wouldn't. They bloomed their head off the previous year. We had no new growths, so effectively at the beginning of the year it was just sitting there. By rights, the previous year's canes should be thinking about blooming, but because it was out of season last year, it wasn't. And this is my misbehaving nobile. In this case it was half expected. It was bought in full bloom out of season. It possibly could take a year or maybe even 2 to kick back in. Most nobiles bloom late winter, early spring, but not all. There are some that have the genetics to bloom a bit later. Anyway, the original plant that I bought had the 2 old canes. They're still with us. These were the 2 canes I grew, and what we have going on now is new growths, which is good. So we've got a couple of nice new growths here. One here, one here. And with those new growths are some new roots coming. Not that this plant needs any, it's got an absolute pot full of roots. But it's an opaque pot. I got those to try them out basically. The idea being that I can keep my eye on the roots without having to have a black pot over the top, because it keeps the light out enough to stop the algae growing. Yeah, so the progress on this is 2 new growths pushing on with some new roots, and in the back of my mind I'm thinking, are last year's canes going to bloom? Ever? You know, under normal circumstances, those should have bloomed in the spring, early spring. If they were going to bloom at the same time as the previous lot did, then they should already have some buds forming, which they haven't got. So these two canes from last year are a bit of a conundrum. What are they going to do? They could wait until next spring and bloom then. They could bloom at an odd time, unexpectedly, just almost out of the blue, almost any time. So at the moment, I'm more interested in growing the new growths on, ready for next year at some point. If those canes mature properly this year, then they should bloom early next year. These canes grew on into the winter, so they didn't mature at the right time. They didn't get their terminal leaf when they should have done, so they're not right. So all we can do with this is wait and see what it does. Nobiles can do some strange things. And bloom at odd times, so we just have to wait and see. But nice new growth, some new roots coming, and two strong canes from last year that may or may not bloom sometime, maybe. That's that one. Lions, tigers and bears, oh my, this is the big one. And it is a big one too. You don't get the impression of scale looking at a picture, not even on video. I have to hold it so that it's next to me, and you realise it goes from below my waist to above my head. Anyway, at the beginning of the year, this time, back in March, there were no signs of new growths yet. There may have been some tiny little new growths showing. It was just sitting there, showing us the growths from last year, sticking up the top there, the ones from the previous year hanging lower down, not doing much at all at this point in the year, but what it was doing really well was not blooming. Becoming a bit of a notorious non-bloomer, but it's not a late winter, early spring bloomer, so I was just waiting for this to come back into growth, really. Well, this is impossible to get far enough back to film properly. Also, it's so big, it's difficult to see the progress on it. But in reality, although we were looking at a still, this has almost doubled in size. The only way you can tell really is to look at the mount in the background and find that it's completely covered now. So what we've got, the stages of growth here are, these are the relatively stunted canes that it grew when it didn't have a very good root system. And then all of these much larger and longer canes up here are the ones from last year. And mingled in amongst them are the new canes for this year, of which there are far more than I'm prepared to count. But they're coming out all over the plant, and they've got this beautiful patterning on them. Absolutely gorgeous, which completely disappears. And they adopt a normal cane look to them, you know, with the sort of browny woody sheaths up the canes. But the amount of new growth on here is absolutely incredible. Logically, the canes that could bloom are the 2-year-old canes down here, but there are no signs of any buds anywhere on this plant. So this remains a non-bloomer. And then these canes from last year, these are perfectly good blooming size canes, but I don't know when they're going to do it. And they're going to get totally swamped with a new growth soon. I mean, just this area here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's a dozen new growths just there. And then we've got all the rest of the plant that comes right round and on round here, with loads more coming out everywhere. So, and on top of it now, it does have a good root system. The roots are pushed in all directions, right up to the top of the mount, right round the sides, and I'll pick it up, it will probably fall over. It's got a good root system now. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So it's now a matter of waiting for the proverbial blooming time. I don't think this is a late winter, early spring bloomer. I think it's one of those, I think it's a little bit more like the Friedrichianum, blooms a bit later in the year, if it's going to. But at the moment it's showing no signs of doing that. There's not a bud on that plant or a nubbin, not a sign. So we will have to wait possibly another season. And if we get to the third season and we don't get any blooms, I'm not sure it's got a future with me, because it means it's not going to bloom for me. If it doesn't, then it won't. Not a lot I can do about it. I can't dramatically change the temperatures in here. I can change the light to a degree, but it already gets good light. You know, it's up in the roof. It's some of my best light. So it would be difficult to imagine what I could do to get it to bloom. It might be that the trick is to really cool it down and give it a really cool summer. I don't know. But at the moment we have no sign of blooms, but what we do have is a plant that is growing incredibly well. I couldn't ask for a better growing plant. It does well. It just needs to get its act together and bloom. And I don't think this plant ever has. And there's some plants, some orchids, are just very, very reluctant to bloom. And one day they will. And sometimes you'll never know what you changed or what was different, and they just do. And then often those types, when they do, they will forevermore at their appropriate season. They'll just do it every year once you get them to do it for the first time. And I may well have one of those, but it's certainly growing well. Well pleased with it. So, my big one. This is, for those of you who have been around long enough to know of the expression, the big box orchids, this was the reason the box was so big, literally, to get this in. So that's that one. And this is the little Dendrobium Victoria reginae. This was a gift. It's either a very small division or a young plant, one or the other. Nowhere near blooming size or anything. At the time we looked at this in March, it did have a new growth, pushing on slowly. It's only just visible against the mount there. You can just see the 3 or 4 pale green leaves on a very short new growth, and one long older cane, leafless. So that's effectively what I had. This is a long way off becoming a mature plant. I mean, I'd expect that new growth to push on a little bit through the year, but I don't know what sort of progress I'm going to get. I mean, you never know. Dendrobiums are full of surprises, and this could be one of them. Who knows? It may perform a miracle. Anyway, let's have a look. Now, as you can see, the progress on this one is absolutely phenomenal. You know, we've gone from a tiny little plant to nice mature canes, and we've even got some buds starting to show. So I'm well pleased with the progress. I can't keep a straight face. If you fell for that, you must be nuts. There's the original one. I now have 2. And I think, quite honestly, just to brighten things up a bit, I will keep the 2 going. But this is our original plant here. So this is the one we are really monitoring the progress on. And all I can say is that there are a few roots have grown, and this little wispy cane is still growing. There's no signs of new canes on it yet, but it is slowly but surely making some progress. It was a weak plant, a very weak plant, and it is going to take a while to get some strength into it and start growing some canes like the new one next to it. But it's still going, it's still with me, and as I said, this little new growth is progressing slowly but surely. The cane keeps getting longer and longer, and we have had some root growth. Not a lot, but we've had some. You can see some of the white roots near the top there, one with a green tip. So it's still there. And then this is the new one I bought. I always said if I saw a decent sized one I would get it. I did, and I did, in that order. What we've got here are a couple of virtually leafless canes like this one, which has decided to push some buds out. I'm over the moon. I did say you would hear the cheer when the first Victoria reginae bloom opens in this grow room, and it looks like it will. I don't know how long they'll take to develop, but they're on their way. And then what I bought was the two almost leafless cane and a leafless cane, and 3 canes with leaves on that a couple of them didn't look too good. This one, it doesn't look very good, and the leaves don't look very good, but it's still growing, so it's still going to extend, and it's got a growing tip that's active. This one over here is doing exactly the same thing, so it's progressing, new leaves. And the shorter one up here, this is probably the youngest cane here, and again it's growing. So I've got 3 actively growing canes on the new plant and 1 actively growing on the older one. So we'll pull those 2 along together, I think, from now on, because they're both at different stages. One is a very, very young, well, I think it's a division. I don't think it's a seedling. It's just a little piece that was broken off from a larger plant that didn't have very good roots, and it's just going to take a long time to get going, literally. Whereas the other one is a division off of a reasonable sized plant, I would think. It might have been grown on from a seedling, but I doubt it. So there we go. We now have a pair. The only thing I dread is I bought one reasonable Victoria reginae. Wasn't a bad plant at all. And when it came into bloom, it was pink. It wasn't the species, it was a hybrid, and I was really cross because I was so looking forward to it. Well, this one better not do it. This better be the real thing. There's no way of telling till it blooms. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing excuse me, that colour in this grow room. Really looking forward to it. So that's that one. And then this one was my phalaenopsis type, Thai angel, and I'd split it basically into 2 plants. The idea was one was going to go to somebody else, but they changed their mind. But so this is a division, one of my own divisions, and at this particular point in March there was the tiniest sign of a new growth at the base. You can just see it there. Very top heavy, so had to be staked to be held in place. Virtually no roots. This was the older part of the plant, and root system on it was almost non-existent, so there was nothing to hold it in the pot. It's effectively just perched on top of the media and staked in place. But we do have a new growth, so it's a matter of hopefully growing that on during the growing season. Okay, with the phalaenopsis type, the progress on this is obvious. The new growth has pushed on quite strong, given that we're not even halfway through the growing season yet. So we should end up with a good, strong, well-leaved cane for this year's growth. I think it is only going to be the one, but given that that was a very weak division, it's good that it's grown a new growth. And on top of that, what is probably more important, or as important, is it's pushing out a good new root system from the base now, because it didn't have very good roots as a division. That's why it's got stakes all over the place. There was nowhere near enough roots to hold it up. And even with the new roots that are just on the surface of the pot, if I pick the plant up, it will just pull out of the pot. There's not enough roots to even hold it in there. So progress, good progress on this. New cane is pushing on nice and strong. Potential for blooming on the phalaenopsis types. The initial bloom is virtually always straight out of the crown, basically. That doesn't mean to say it won't bloom from elsewhere, and it doesn't mean to say it won't bloom from the crown again. They have a habit of sometimes shooting out from the base of the spike, but they will also push out lower down occasionally. If you look on this one, that's had one on the crown, and then it's had 2 lower down. Yeah, so just because it's bloomed once, don't give up, it will bloom again. Yeah, and I've seen these bloom on leafless canes and push out a spike. So give them their chance, basically. You know, take a cane off as a last resort when it's all shriveled with no leaves on and serves no purpose. Then it can come off. But anyway, progress on that. Nice strong new cane. 2 would have been nice, but given its poor root system, 1's good, and by the end of this growing season it should then have a good root system. So we should get some blooms on that latest growth at some point. Not really seasonal, the phalaenopsis type. They can chuck a spike out almost anywhen. So, you know, if you've got a big enough plant, a strong vigorous plant with lots and lots of canes on, they can almost be permanently in bloom, just coming off of different canes at different times. So yeah, if you can get a nice productive one that is free flowering and it's a big strong plant with lots of canes, you can have a mass of flowers, you know, over a very, very long period of time, if not almost permanently. So it's just a matter of getting a good one. There's so many hybrids around, and some of them haven't really got that strength in them. They're okay and they bloom, but they haven't got that mass blooming potential that a few of them have got. It's a matter of spotting one really and seeing it for real. And there it is under my nose. Oh, and it's for sale. And I don't need me to sell my house to actually buy it. Come home with it. Yeah, doesn't matter if it's in your local supermarket or it doesn't matter where you find it. If you find one of those like that, I mean, okay, they will have been pushed in the nursery, but as the nobilies can be pushed in different ways, and they can be brought into a mass blooming far too early for the size of the plant. It takes all the energy out of the plant, whereas these, they're not so easy to do that to. Oh, there's a jet going over. I haven't heard one of them for a very long time. So it's not military, it's just a passenger one. Be a Lear type jet, I expect, that type of size. Anyway, so yeah, progress on this one. And blooms will come on that new cane down the line at some point. It might be next year before those spikes push out, but we shall see. There we go. So that was part 2, update 1. The selected Dendrobiums. I do have a lot to choose from. They were all chosen for a reason. There was logic there. If you want to go back and see the original selection video, which was done back in December, I believe, the link to that will come up at the end now, which was where it all started effectively. So yeah, that's those, and I hope you enjoyed my little ruse, my little trick. As if a flipping Dendrobium could go from plant A to plant B in 3 months. That doesn't happen. So there we go, that's the Dendrobiums. Part 3 will follow in the not too distant future. I want to get all 4 parts done during June, and June is eating away quite quickly at the moment, so I will get on with the other 2 parts, but I don't want them all squashed up together. I have some different things in between, and we'll go from there. So thanks for dropping by. Hope you enjoy the format and the way these move along, and I'll see you next time.